Let's get back to our discussions, and now we'll move from a dialogue to a panel discussion on how green industrial policies shape the energy transition. Just so that you know, I know in the program, Mark van Stiphout of the EU Commission was supposed to be here. He's still supposed to be here, but he's missing in action right now. Hopefully he'll join us in the next few seconds or minutes. But on that, we'll start anyways for the sake of time and the fact that after that there's a cocktail and discussion more. So let's get going. And to moderate this panel, we have pleased to have Julia Sauder. How do you Sauder, thank you, who's the CEO of Long Duration Energy Storage Council. You've heard her before in the panel discussion, so she's going to lead this panel, and I'll leave that to you.
Thank you again so much, Vincent, and thank you all very much again for participating today. It's really important to have inclusive conversations where you can really learn from each other and build on relationships, and thrilled to be part of a panel. We'll see when Mark gets here, but if not, I'm really excited to hear it from Dirk, who's the Vice President for Foresight and Analytics for E.ON, and then Valerie, who's Vice President for Power and Grid for Europe for Schneider Electric. And Dr. Wu, thank you for joining us. She's a senior expert from the State Grid Energy Research Institute. Thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So as you saw in the panel description that we all have in front of us, there's been a lot of dialogue about the push for new policies because we now have these global targets to meet our net zero goals and decarbonize working together. So as we comment on these huge policy changes, we wanted to have a discussion about what's working, what's not, and what's really going to help utilities in the next 2, 5, and 10-year horizon. So, just in the last year, which has been, truly a tipping point, we've seen changes from around the world. So in the European Union, we've had Repower EU, we've had the Green Deal, we've had Fit for 50. There's just been ongoing pushes and initiatives to really bring together the European countries and to really push again on achieving our net zero targets. In addition to this, we've been seeing collaborative competition around the world. So in the United States, there's been the Investment Recovery Act, and again, kind of a push towards making policies and changes happen. We're seeing this in India. There's been a lot of push on portfolio approaches and around-the-clock accounting to really help renewables, storage, and all these changes that have to happen in communities move forward. So really want to hear from all the panelists today on the important role of these different policies. Are they working? Are they not working? Are they helpful? So if you could give us some ideas from your company's perspective on the benefits and also some of the barriers that are affecting the net zero technology sector. And I'm going to start with you, Valerie.
Okay, thank you. Indeed, we see a lot of policies happening in Europe. Of course, you mentioned the Red Deal, and there are other policies. There is CBAM. I will come back to each of them. There are Europe Taxonomy, and there is NZIA. And I will describe a bit each of them, but just to let you all know that these policies are very targeted to generation, like renewable generation, and the latest Red Deal or the latest version of Repower EU is calling for 43% of renewable in the energy mix by 2030. So there is a strong focus on renewable. There is a strong focus also on industry decarbonation. There is also a focus on banning SF6-free and on pushing that we remove SF6-free from the different utilities asset like the substation. But there is no push on the grid itself as avoiding it to become the bottleneck. And what we see missing in terms of policies is really that the grid has to integrate all of that, from the new generation, from the prosumer, potential aggregator, VPPs, distributed energy resources, the demand, the pressure that will be on the grid is at least in Europe a factor 2 between now and in 2030 in terms of electrification. So the huge demand. You mentioned that the project to expand the capex of a grid is a 8 to 10 years life cycle, and of course, which means if we start now to invest the capex to face that demand, we won't make it. So basically, there needs to be a push on policies to help and to push the grid to digitize and flexibilize, if I may say so, because the only way to being able to face that demand is for the grid to reinvent themselves. Digitization is key because we have already, experience of some digital grid. We call it ADMS, Advanced DMS software that we deployed in Australia, in Italy, in the UK, for example, and we see that it can avoid capex spending. So this can really help the grid by first being more efficient, losses reduction. There is a real impact, bottom line, of losses reduction. We have measured up to 20 million yearly savings. I think it's with our friends of Enel by having deployed ADMS. So this is making your basically network more efficient and partially satisfying an incremental demand. This is also helping penalty avoidance because when you have an outage of your grid, etc., you pay. It's a regulated business, so you pay penalties. And basically, this is help also by this digitization. You can reduce engineering cost of managing your network. So this is not only helping you to increase a bit the demand, but it's also helping you in the bottom line. Somehow you have more budget to do more things. So that's one point. The second point is on flexibility, because in the past the grid were more designing their network based on peak demand. And this time will be over. If they want to absorb basically double the current demand, they can't dimension on peak demand, which means one, they need to be able to integrate DER, distributed energy resources, and prosumer microgrid. It can be the building coming from the city of Copenhagen, whatever, as an extra generation to face the peak demand and dimension their network on an average demand and integrate that. So this requires digitization, but flexibility policies. Today, except in the UK, in Europe, there is no flexibility policy and regulation. So we are seeing some trials in Denmark, in France, but really we are waiting for EU to build a recommendation and from the government in each country to implement that. And my last point is on this flexibility. This will also be able to implement sometimes demand response. One of the big demand will come from the electrical vehicle fleet and infra charging. But at peak, we have to be able to have that flexibility to basically implement demand response and stop that during this hour. So it's a complete way of changing the way basically we see the grid interaction with the demand, and policy are not all here yet.
Thank you, Valerie. Your point of changing cultures, changing the way we think, we're changing our entire economies, and we have to do this, to your point, in a very timely manner. And so building on your point of digitalization and efficiency and cost savings, on the need for flexibility, and just looking at the new energy shifting that we have to have, especially because renewable energy with storage is the new baseload. And so how does this really kind of transform into the policy settings? And then on demand response, energy efficiency, the trade-offs that we're all speaking to. And Dr. Wu, coming to the other part of the world, like to hear your perspective of how the policies are changing, how there's opportunities and funding for helping electric utilities, and then also just your perspective on these 3 points that were raised by Valerie.
It's about the decarbonization policies in China, and in order to effectively address climate change and actively participate in global greenhouse gas governance, China has put forward clear carbon emission reduction targets 3 times. And for the first time at the Copenhagen World Climate Conference in 2009, China pledged to reduce carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP by 40% to 45% in 2020 compared to 2005. And that's already achieved in 2019. And secondly, at the Paris Climate Conference in 2015, China proposed that carbon dioxide emissions will peak around 2013, and the carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP will be reduced by 60% to 65% compared with 2005. And thirdly, that is in September 2020, at the general debate of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And the target is that the peaking carbon emissions ahead of the schedule by 2030, and the vision of carbon neutrality by 2060. And compared with 5 years earlier, the target has been set to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP to 65% compared with the 5 years earlier. That is 60% to 65% compared with 2005. So that's the 3 times we proposed the targets. And in order to achieve this, about the decarbonization policies, and that is in 2021, we proposed 1+N policy systems, a bunch of policies for the carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. And that is on October the 12th, 2021, in a keynote speech at the 15th conference of the parties to the Convention and on Biological Diversity Leaders Commit. And the President Xi proposed that we have to build 1+N policy systems. And the one refers to the opinions of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council on the complete, accurate, and comprehensive implementation of the new development concept and achieving carbon peaking and carbon neutrality. And that is the one. And for the N series, the first N is the action plan for peaking carbon emissions before 2030. And the N also includes for the implementation plans for carbon peaking in subfields and industries such as energy, industry, transportation, and urban and rural construction, as well as the plans for scientific and technological support and security, carbon sink capacity, physical policies, and so on. And I made a list of a bunch of the policies, and there are more and more policies come into practice, and this is the list as of June 2022, and we can see as a bunch of policies like including the action plan for industrial energy efficiency. So that is specifically, and we can see the action plans for electrification of key industries, and we have already put forward policies just ahead of the carbon target has set as early as 2017. And then from
Dr. Wu, I want to come back to you because this is really helpful to hear you outline the various steps of the action plans and the dates that has already been achieved. We just had Mark join us from the European Commission, so we're going to come back in the room, and then we're going to come back to you for additional updates and insights on some of the policies you just outlined. So thank you for the introduction. We'll come back. Hi, Mark. Welcome. I'm going to go to Dirk next and then come to you. So going back to the various policies, incentives, what have you seen that's working, that's been insightful from the EU initiatives and what's happening in the United States, Canada, India, and then what's still missing?
Well, first of all, I do think that right now we see that in pretty much all the regions we see development programs, financial support for greening our industries, which I think is good. They're also financially on similar levels, but when you look at how they are designed, it is still quite different. Just focusing on the US and Europe, I think earlier in the discussion, someone of you mentioned fiscal policies, right? So maybe we could adopt that. These tax credits that you can get in the US in the Inflation Reduction Act are really an easy tool to implement change. They're easy to handle. Obviously, it would be nice to see something like that in Europe, but as we all know, this is not possible because fiscal policies is in national hands and not on European level. So we would need to see it on national level. But I think this is right now something that really makes the US way of dealing with this easy, and we see utilities, other companies really moving into that market. So once the Inflation Reduction Act was announced, pretty much all companies evaluated, should we do something more in the US? Even we looked at it. We don't have business in the US. So we looked at it as well, just to check that we don't miss out something important there. And I think in Europe we're still in the discussion on it. When you see these plans, it's a combination of activities. Should reduce bureaucracy, should reduce costs, make it easier for people to get to the support that is needed, which is all good, I think, all good and necessary steps. We also see this on national levels as well, also quite good and effective. And I think there are we sometimes still discuss a bit about subsidies and supports, but effectively it's about triggering a transition. And in Europe right now, one of those biggest discussions that at least I do follow is about redesigning the market, right? Thinking about how can we make electricity, energy affordable to our customers. And don't know if most of you come from Europe, so you have followed those different approaches and suggestions on how to change the wholesale electricity markets potentially in order to reduce the dependency on gas. which is all difficult because that electricity market, as it works now, works pretty well. So then capping a bit the prices, protecting customers, and that is a good solution for now. But in the long term, the solution will be around investing into renewables. So I mentioned it before. I think the adoption of PPAs, but also contracts for difference, really attracting a lot of investors into this market, being willing to invest into renewables is a good way to achieve the targets. What I think is pretty important for us to look at is to make sure that these volumes still reach the market again. So if you think about PPAs, usually that's just between a company and another company. So the volumes are not reaching the market. Maybe good for some players if they do have the facility and can afford the costs that are necessary to cover in order to negotiate and manage PPAs. But all others will depend on the market and in one way or the other. And effectively, that was at least what we used to protect our customers. So, as I said before, 48 million customers, we protected them by hedging our position, hedging their position. That means we buy electricity at forward markets well in time, so that we haven't seen these high price spikes in the beginning of the crisis like I've seen in other European markets, so we balance it. And I think that's quite important. We discuss market changes, and it's good to discuss market changes, but we need to be aware of those elements that should not change. And for me, this is one. Support the build out of renewables, support industries in really doing the change. Don't overly subsidize them. It will, well, if you need to now subsidize industries in Europe for the next decade or two, it will also not be helpful and will not solve the foundation of the problem.
That's really helpful, Dirk, because you also highlighted how do we, the transition has been triggered, and now what tools are we using to really help change the marketplace, but within the right boundaries so that we don't create chaos? And how do we do this with various certainty and tools? Incentives are different than subsidies, and it's really great to see that around the world there is now collaborations of different utilities and companies seeing how they could really gain from the different benefits. The storage target in the United States is 30% standalone, and I know that actually was influenced by what Europe was doing. But then there's additional incentives that can be added to it. So another 10% for community benefits, another 10% for local manufacturing, another 10% for partnerships. And so you can get up to 60, 70% if you do have the formula right. And your point about making sure we have the right formula that can really incentivize each country within the European Union to make sure that we can really get the benefits of the changes needed. Like one of the 24/7 Clean Power Purchase Agreement is a really powerful tool in how to really have the accountability, the transparency, and acknowledgement of this. Mark, some points that were made also earlier about digitalization and flexibility and demand response and energy efficiency. Also, we heard about different targets in China and different tools. Jumping into this, you know, what are the benefits of this new regulatory framework, but then also what are the barriers that this group can work together on addressing fast?
Yes. Good. Right. Good question. First of all, sincere apologies for being late. I was caught up in another meeting that I could not get out of, so sorry to only join you now, but I'm very happy to be here because this is really an important discussion, and also, let's say, the framework in which we're having it here is very good, because I think, let's say, as part of the recent discussions on the IRA and the Green Deal Industrial Plan, sometimes we forget, I think, that in essence, this is really good news, right? It means in China, it's going full speed in the energy transition. In the US, it's going full speed in the energy transition. And in Europe, it's going full speed in the energy transition. And also in India and many places around the world, not enough yet, but more and more, right? So I think that this is really something that I want to emphasize. Of course, we are then looking at how do we make sure that in Europe we also benefit from this economically, that people invest in Europe and not just in the US. I would still like to think that this is not a zero-sum game. There's going to be more demand for wind turbines in the US and in Europe. And if you hear the wind industry, they don't seem to think that, let's say, they would either sell a wind turbine here or in the US, right? We need more of them, much more of them here, and we need much more of them in the US and elsewhere in the world. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's at the same time the competition between, let's say, the different big economic blocks, so to say, in both in terms of technologies, but also more and more in terms of policies, also I think has good dimensions, because it's, you know, we're also learning from each other. And like you're saying, in Europe we would like to do more about, let's say, be more agile in releasing such a blunt instrument like tax credits in the US, or let's say at least some of us think that this would be nice if we could do that, but we can't. But it's challenging us also to come up with a response, and I, you know, the competition is no longer just purely on technologies and companies. It's also about policies and governments trying to come up with the right response to climate change, which I think is only right if you consider the seriousness of the problem. So in that sense, I am actually quite positive about it, until, let's say, you look outside at the weather and you read the news and you see what's actually happening. Then I'm not sure if all of what we're doing is really fast enough. So that's like not good. But in any case, that's not what we're discussing here. In terms of what we are doing in the EU, then the Green Deal Industrial Plan is not everything we're doing, right? It's really putting the emphasis on the industrial development next to the Fit for 55, the Green Deal as such, all the targets that we have been agreeing on recently, a lot of the before and after Christmas break. Now in the Energy Council, they are trying to agree today also on the renewable directive. So there is a whole set of policies that are together trying to both create the right framework for the deployment of the technologies, and then with the Green Deal Industrial Plan, also the manufacturing side of it. The energy cost is a big concern in that, and that is why also with the market design, we considered it necessary to come up with, let's say, I would say tweaks on how the market works, but not addressing the fundamentals of the wholesale market, because we think that is still the best way to guarantee efficient investment signals. But I think the realization was also that it was not good enough, definitely not from a political objectives point of view, of giving the right signals for the longer term in terms of investments in renewables, and also passing through those benefits of renewable investments to the final customers. So I think this is something that we try to tweak with the market design. Then this is, you know, this discussion is not finished, right? Many countries are now also looking at what can we do about energy market or electricity prices or energy prices, because our energy intensive industry is really suffering, and I think this is a serious concern. And here I think at the moment the real let's say the actual state of the discussion, I think, is very much between how much do we keep a European approach to it, how much can individual member states do to support, and how do we make sure that they do that while keeping the integrity of the internal market, both for energy prices as well as for a level playing field for investment in manufacturing. So the Net Zero Industry Act that I'm currently very much involved in is trying to address some of those things. But I think what is still needed, and what we are just, well, actually, I'm also not sure if we will be successful, but what is needed, and where I think we see the first, how do you say that, the first kind of hands being raised of a request to address this more at the EU level, is a European discussion on what do we actually want to support in manufacturing, and how do we go about it. both on the energy market but also on the kind of manufacturing policies, because I think this is still something where we always have taken the approach that for the internal market we just make sure that that we create the demand, and then industries will invest, and some countries will want to support one thing or the other. At EU level, we support the innovation, but that's where we stop. And I think now we're getting much more into we need to be much more conscious about what type of manufacturing you actually want to have. But I think we're, in terms of also looking at that from a European point of view without becoming a real planning economy, is something I think where more is needed, but where we are really at the beginning of such a discussion.
Your points on the integration, the kind of balancing of the what's positive and motivating us, so it's also scary and challenging and frightening about where we stand in climate change, and how to make sure we're having this constant balance of trade-offs as we push forward, because we need to have these changes, but how do you continue to help innovation, as was raised earlier today, and really push these collaboration of policies. Dr. Wu, I'm coming back to you. So we've talked about collaborative policies, we've talked about manufacturing, we've talked about innovation, different funding opportunities. Is there something that you want to share about what some of these global policies are helping China, and what China is doing to also present some of their global policies that are changing the market?
Yes, about the because I just said that a lot of policies implemented in China, but compared with the global policies or global markets, China is a kind of just highlighted in our own country. So and compared with the global markets, like China's carbon market is like at the very start stage. So we just like working on two legs. One is let the market be more mature, and the other is implementing policies. So continue with the talk before. We implement a bunch of policies, and especially in the electrification of key industries, and we implement many policies like in the construction field and like in the transportation field, and some are also in the industry fields, but here we just represent the policies like the partial power layout plan, like the guiding options of.
Okay, as we try to get Dr. Wu back, I'm going to come to you, Valerie, about Schneider Electric, because you're seeing different policies enacted around Europe, and also influencing what's happening around the world. How would you build on this collaborative spirit of what can really push things forward here, or also maybe stifle?
Yes, so first I would like to call to Mark, because you were not here when I was speaking, and there was something a bit directed to you. So to make it simple, the Net Zero Industry Act and the Europe taxonomy is very much targeting industries and generation. But my first point was on grid bottleneck to face the huge demand growth. Integrate at renewable, DER, prosumers, VPPs, etc. And today there is no policies in Europe or no incentive to flexibility. The main country where we have flexibility in place in the UK. The first version was not very fair to prosumers, and was very too much favoring the grid, and was not a win-win business model. The edition 2 hopefully over IIO will be better. But what are you doing, and what can we all do together to influence a flexibility model, because as I said before, the dimensioning of a grid cannot be on a peak demand, has to be on a kind of average demand and manage a peak with integration of basically microgrids for flexibility and some demand response maybe on EV charging. So we need to have that moving. What is your view, contribution? How do you believe we could all work towards that? And then I come back to your point, sorry.
Go ahead.
Right. So, yeah. Okay. So I realize that the market for flexibility is not everywhere in Europe developed yet. That it's not like a standard issue. But if you're saying that the EU is not doing much about it, then I'd actually be surprised, or I would disagree. But if, let's say, the point that you think that we're not doing enough about it is also something that worries me, obviously, because I think that we have been emphasizing flexibility a lot, the need for flexibility as a way to integrate renewables, as a way to basically make the transformation of the energy system, both in electrification and in including more renewables or energy efficiency. Already with the clean energy package, so specifically we focus on electricity. The clean energy package of, let's say, some years ago, emphasized a lot the need to value flexibility, the right for consumers to have smart meters as a way to be able to respond to price signals, so create flexibility because they would be incentivized to consume more when the price is low and consume less when the price is high. We've been working, and so that is really on the wholesale market dimension of things, but then flexibility also is becoming more and more important, and not just to integrate renewables in terms of the generation, but also to make sure that the network capacity is sufficient to bring in all these renewables, and that is starting to become a bigger and bigger problem in many places. And on top of that, the demand for electricity from electric cars, from heat pumps, that is just starting. But if you look at the ambition that we have in the EU, that is also going to increase. The demand for electricity at the local level for that is going to increase big time. So to make all these things work, we in the network, we have, with the clean energy package, also included requirements that network operators start rewarding flexibility for balancing, for congestion management. And it's the key requirement there is for network operators to give it a value. And so, for example, for renewables or storage to be able to participate in balancing markets to manage the frequency, or for local system operators to give value to flexibility to solve congestion in a network. I mean, this can also happen at transmission level, but there's it's let's say less of an issue, and where it is an issue, it's already being addressed to quite some extent. So at the distribution level, there is a lot needed, in particular in digitalizing the network, to know what's actually happening, to be able to steer based on the knowledge of the situation of the grid. And these are quite a few steps that need to be taken, because traditionally, of course, distribution system operators have been, managing hardware and making sure that the cables are in place and the transformers work, but they have not really been used to steering the network like TSOs have been. So the clean energy package puts the basically the rules out there to make this happen and to make it possible. We know that the implementation of some of these things is slow, also because it's difficult. And some of the things we're actually emphasizing in the market design now, the proposal from March, is putting an emphasis on some of the things that we thought should have been on the agenda of implementation already, like the emphasis on flexibility. And now we're asking member states to define flexibility needs at a national level. This is very much linked to putting the emphasis on implementing the things that are already there. we've been putting quite a lot of money into supporting network operators to see how such markets for flexibility should be set up. And we're doing this also because we're worried that, let's say, if you don't anticipate this need for flexibility and creating a market, and you don't make sure that there is a, let's say, a market structure set up to valorize flexibility for when you need it, then you will need it all of a sudden, and then the time is too short to set up such a market. And then you will just say, okay, we don't have a market now. Nobody's going to be able to provide this flexibility because there are no suppliers offering this type of service. So what do? We need to build a big battery somewhere, or we need to just invest in hardware, and then you kill the market again for a few years. So I think this is also part of the difficulty that we see in terms of how do you create such markets, because so you need to anticipate the need for it, but you're not going to make much money while you anticipate, right? But then when there is money and there is no market, then somebody will say, okay, we do a rigorous investment that's much more expensive and kill the market again for a few years. So this is not a, there's no, we don't think there's an easy solution to it, but at the same time, I think that we are putting a lot of emphasis on making sure that flexibility is valorized. So.
Yes, building on the flexibility theme, I'm going to throw it back to you, Dirk, to...
Yeah, just to shortly add to that, because I would agree that I don't see not yet enough focus on flexibility in that, so I wouldn't say there's nothing, of course not.
What is lacking?
Well, I think you mentioned this on the DSO level. So I think what we need to make sure is that there is certain incentive also for DSOs to think about batteries managing local grid congestions. So you mentioned the smartification in the grids. You could think about other measures in order to secure either battery services or anything like that in the system. So I think in general there is still more that we have to look on, which we do, and I don't know how much is actually European regulation and how much is national regulation, but in the end, I mentioned that before, I still have the feeling that there is this basic tendency of thinking about a grid as copper and not yet about this being a quite digital and smart activity that also need these appliances in there. And the other thing is I would not necessarily agree that the market does give us long-term investment signals for managing flexibility in the long term. So secure baseload electricity or other means of then managing the times where maybe there's a bit less wind or sun. And I think those investments, the market will not give the investment signals. And we didn't see so much on capacity markets in the current proposal or anything. But if you design a capacity market where then you add a certain locational element to it, you also incentivize, well, at least supply at certain points in the grid, which if that's flexible supply like a battery or so on, it could help. So something like that, I think, could still be a good addition. And as you said, it's not just, you're not transforming the entire system, but you just address those bits and pieces which right now do not fully work. And I think these securing long-term investments next to renewables is also something to be addressed.
Those are great points, because around the world, the capacity market discussion is happening in real time. That there must be changes to get some more regulatory certainty, to give the long-term signals. And the ancillary service benefits that provided by long duration energy storage and many other attributes are just not credited today. So we need to have a market that really does pull in all these additional value adds. Even the planning that was mentioned earlier today of transmission and distribution deferment and the cost savings you have for that, the tie-in equity. So it's really important that that we continue to support the policymakers to really continue to push forward. You're taking great steps. Take a few more, because again, as you made it, we don't have much time, and we've got to have some flexibility within the system to really capture all these benefits. And one of the things wanted to highlight is that you know, redispatch capability is also something that's been out and debated, and we need to really again look at all the attributes of changing our entire ecosystem. And coming back to Dr. Wu in China, how is China working on flexibility? Are there pieces that you're really pushing forward to support that you're seeing globally or that you're influencing?
Oh yeah, about the flexibility is really, really important for promoting the renewables. And in China now, we have a huge target for the hydro, for the pumped hydro capacity, and that is, and for the newly typed storage, and to promote because the price of the newly storage is really high now, so we try to promote the industry to let the price down, and the government also promote all kinds of the storage technologies, and to let this. And the third is that the local government is encouraging the renewables to make a ratio of storage that is a requirement for the renewables for the renewables to install it. So you have to require like 20% of the storage to be installed like that. So flexibility is really important. And also on the market side, we are promoting the like the affiliate market for the flexibility, and that's all. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. And when you're having fun, time flies. So I'm noticing that we have about 15 more minutes, but I want to make sure if you have a question, we want to come to all of you too. So out of curiosity, does anyone have a question right now? Sorry, what's it?
Okay, thank you. I'm from Hellenic DSO. It's one in the country. And I have, let's say, a comment that maybe this car with full speed maybe is crashing a wall. And this wall is a distribution network. Because really, just in a few minutes, it's not all these supporting schemes that come in are in the competitive part only. We have, as a regulated activity, we have strong regulation in our countries. And many times regulators don't give us the incentives to invest, not only flexibility, but in capacity, in electrification, in any digitalization, automation, observation, new trends in DSOs. So I think as to Commission mainly, to see also support schemes for DSOs. We need the funds that up to now it's not possible to take so much for this. And what we face now, we have installed capacity, we try to install capacity, but due to problems from digitalization and observation in the network, we have cutoffs. So what's the point? Is only to install, but also to use all distribution energy resources. That's my point. We have from many years, we started talking about distribution network, because is this the backbone of energy transition? And this is very important. My point, and as UDSO entity, because I'm vice chair in strategic advisor group of a UDSO entity, we try to persuade, to force, to be convinced European Union that DSOs need funds, because the investments are very high in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophia. It's really important to see all the pieces that make up the infrastructure. You know, the distribution, the transmission, the home, the industry, the hospitals, the airports, the transportation, the ports. All of these different factors are part of the flexible transition that we have to really weave together. And having the incentives is essential. Having the public-private partnerships to help fund these initiatives is critical. Working together, with all the different players to really push the right plans to keep each other supported, because that's how you're going to de-risk this transition. So, coming back to each of you in 2 minutes, what I think we've talked about global influence. I mean, there's a lot of change happening around the world. It's exciting, it's thrilling, it's intimidating, but there's a lot of movement going on. And I think it's really, as you mentioned earlier, that this kind of collaborative push that's happening with some healthy competition. Which is one wish that each of you would want to see really come out of this transition that we're having in the next year? I'll start with you.
Okay, so I will take an example because before I was in charge of transportation in Schneider. Example of a port greenification. If you take the challenge of a port with regulation, there are some funding tools, or with, of course, the post-COVID investment and subsidies, but they have to multiply their electrical consumption by 5 to 7, depending on how much berths they have and how much they need to electrify, but including the berths, the buildings, the processes, the cranes, the vehicles, it can be up to 7 times more electricity they would need. So the way we start to see that in the Nordics, in France, is that they partner with ports to build wind offshore infrastructure to become their own microgrid and prosumer, and not completely rely on the DSOs, which are the bottleneck. We I think all agree on that, and start to being able to find their way. And I think the ultimate, my ultimate wish, it was this kind of partnership that they are doing between ports and to basically become their own prosumer, is integrating the DSOs. For me, okay, there is a capacity market of a DSO, but the bottleneck of the future is a DSO. That was what I meant before. And I think that's where we need to I know that we talk a lot of flexibility, but the reality is it's not in practice. There is not the right incentive, the right funding, the right model, and but I believe it's possible, and I see that digitization is bringing to the bottom line of DSO, and we have proof, we have done it. So, okay, there is a way, there is probably some more incentive and regulation, but we can hopefully make it. We have no planet B, so we have to.
So we have to, it's a balancing act that you mentioned, the 7 times additional electricity that's needed to really manage the whole port infrastructure, and the partnerships of the DSOs with all the different incentives, and the balancing of offshore wind, and the amount of curtailment that's happening around the world, and the waste that is happening has got to be stopped. And so what kind of network can you build that you actually have more integrated systems? So I hope your wish comes true. Dirk, what would you work on?
My wish would be that actually the market design discussions turn out as you said it. We don't jeopardize with the whole system and whole setup. We just fix those little pieces that need to be fixed, and we get out of this crisis mode, which I think we do, at least to some extent. So we've also seen some proposals or counter proposals which lead into different directions, but if it, that would be my wish, to not jeopardize with it all, but keep really a close eye on what works well. And maybe on a more personal or company-based note, I would wish for that the boring becomes the new sexy, and that is what do I mean with that? It's there will not be an energy transition without the grids. And I'm not sure if that has been realized by everyone already.
So we need everything. We need the grid, we need DSOs, we need this kind of awareness that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we can make the wheel better with the pieces. And sharing the knowledge from different countries to really make the EU stronger is a great idea. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to complement to that. So I'm afraid I'm going to repeat a bit what you've been saying. I think that, if you let's say, if we focus around flexibility and grids, right, as a core of what we're discussing here, I think models in the world are quite different in terms of how this is organized, right? I think let's say, the state grid in China, or a DSO in Greece, or I don't know, what's it, PTM in the US, they have very different scope and also very different scale, very different, also different roles in the market, right? So I think that makes it difficult to compare, but I think nevertheless there is a joint agenda that I think in the which also I think I see in the EU, like you say, grids are, of course everybody will say we need grids and we need to digitalize them, or we need to modernize them and we need to invest in them. But when it comes to a political discussion around it, it's much easier to talk about, the amount of windmills you want to see in the sea, or the amount of renewables you want to see in the grid, or the amount of electric cars you want to see on the road. And the grid is always a derivative of those things, which is, also true, but there is a risk that it will become a limiting factor. And I think that risk is becoming really imminent, and we already see it in some countries. In the Netherlands, nobody could connect to the grid anymore because there was no capacity. And then it's linked to how the support schemes are designed and many other things. And in Europe there is the particularity of the regulated business that is considered a natural monopoly with a regulator overseeing it, where I think I agree with you that traditionally, of course, when we started liberalizing the markets, the focus was very much on cost efficiency and not on achieving a grid that is ready for the future. So the dynamics are changing of what is actually required from regulators, but also from network operators, and that getting everybody to move in that direction is tricky and difficult. I think we are doing a lot about it at EU level, realizing that regulators' jobs are complicated. But we want to talk about how can we change these models, not just by adding a few obligations to regulators that already have to take care of the efficiency of the grid, they have to take care of the consumers, they have to take care of efficient investments. Just adding another provision in the legislation I don't think will make the difference. What really will make a difference is having an engaged discussion, and the EU DSO is very much involved in that, in terms of what type of grid do we want to see, what kind of indicators can we use to actually measure progress, and how do those actually give signals to investment as a way to trigger a discussion from the inside on the models that are used to evaluate grid investments, and also on the models that are used in network operators of how do we actually go about it, where there needs to be much more cooperation. And I think in that there is a lot of scope for also international cooperation, in terms of raising attention for the importance of the grids. And I think that's the same in China or Greece or in Philadelphia. Raising the let's say the exchange in terms of we all face challenges and we don't really know what our grid will look like in 10 years, or what is really needed, or how consumers will react to some of those things like flexibility markets. But how do we incorporate this kind of open approach to the future with concrete action on the ground now? I think that's also universal, and I think linked to that is part of the fact that people like to focus on the target for cars or a target for offshore windmills also trickles down to attracting the talent. So making that discussion about the essence of the grids and how challenging those jobs are, I think is also a way of attracting talent across the globe. And I think that's also something where I really can see a need for global cooperation, and having exchanges between all these countries will make also that type of jobs much more interesting. So I think that so for me it's raising the political attention at the global level, and linked to that the attraction of skills and a real dialogue on what are the challenges we're all facing and what can we learn from each other. For me I think those would be three things on my global wish list.
That's great.
So relatively modest.
Super easy. Shared insights, which we're seeing more and more about because of the global capacity market discussions. And it's not one size fits all, but there are definitely lessons learned what's happening in Australia, Canada, India, Chile, Greece, UK. I mean, it's amazing. And so that's already really helping push the dialogue to change the political landscape. So Dr. Wu, coming to you for a couple minutes, what would be your wish to really help push the global dialogue so we can actually start changing the marketplace to start seeing policies evolve to build more renewables and storage?
My wish is to how to deal with the uncertainties globally. Yes, because the first concern in China now is to how to sustain the energy security, or we can say the power security, because impacted by the international energy market, the energy price, like the coal price, is high in China now, and like the global warming, because of the global warming, and the extreme weathers are more frequently happened. So how to sustain the power security is a major concern, and what should we do, or have the global cooperation in the measures, or in how to sustain the price to a safe level. And I think we can all make some measures and endeavors. Yeah, that's my thinking. Yeah.
No, that's very helpful, because you help sum up how we're going to work together to manage this global climate crisis. And it's the flexibility, it's the tools, it's the market mechanisms that we will adapt and evolve. It's the shared experiences and the insight that we start to really excite the next generation of the skills that we're going to need them to help create this new world. So I want to thank the panel and thank all of you so much, because this is a very exciting, momentous day to really kind of keep pushing these efforts that we're all doing in a positive way, because we're making a difference. We have to keep doing this. And just to thank you all for pushing us forward in the dialogue so that we can really make some positive change. So thank you very much. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Thank you.